In this video, I'm digging up the history of this 100% home-built Slingshot Dragster that somehow made its way from Corning, New York to East Tennessee. Tracking down the history of an old front-engine dragster is extremely difficult. There were lots of these cars running around in the 50s and 60s, and they ran all the way into the 70s and 80s as bracket cars. If it's a famous car, you can track those down. If it's a car that ran at national events, you can track those down. But if it was a home-built car that ran at hometown drag strips, the chances are really small of being able to accurately put together the car's history. And in the case of this old dragster sitting behind a chassis shop in Knoxville, Tennessee, there was very little to go by. The only thing I had was the chassis itself to study and examine and try to find an exact match somewhere on the internet. So that's what we're going to get into today, the process of finding the history of this old front engine dragster. So if you've seen some of my other videos, you realize this isn't my first rodeo with documenting an old drag car. And we've had a few old dragsters, and they are particularly hard to document because there's just not a lot to piece together the history. And a lot of these cars ran for a very short amount of time. These things changed quickly, they evolved, some of them got cut up or parted out or scrapped altogether, and some of them sat in the woods for 50 years. So in the case of this particular car, I didn't even know this thing existed until I did a video on an old dragster and someone commented on it right here on YouTube. So they told me they were in between Clinton and Knoxville, Tennessee, stopped at a gas station. So they went behind the building, and while they were back there, they could see another building, and behind it was an old front engine dragster frame. So, obviously they didn't explore too much. They just logged this away and thankfully told me about it in this comment. So at this point, I started researching. I looked up Google Maps to see kind of the general area between Clinton and Knoxville, and started looking at all the gas stations, started looking at the little bit of woods behind the gas stations, started doing my research, and I found that GPS race cars was in behind this particular gas station, and that's where this old dragster was sitting. It was sitting right behind this chassis shop. GPS Race Cars builds incredible drag racing chassis for pro modifieds, for drag radial cars. All sorts of drag racing stuff happens in this shop. And behind the shop, kind of out of view of everything else, is this old crusty front engine dragster. So I reach out to the owner of GPS Race Cars, and that's Mr. Greg Daugherty, and he informed me that he bought this car many years ago with intentions of putting it back how it's supposed to be, and it's just got put on the back burner time and time again. So this thing was sitting there. I asked him if I could come see it, take pictures of it, take video of it, and hopefully document its history. This was back in 2020, by the way, so we're talking like 6 years ago that I went and saw this car in person. So this is not just a quick process by any means. So I get up there, I'm walking around this car, I photograph it very heavily. You're looking at the pictures that I took right now. So I'm making mental notes. He's telling me everything he knows about it, but ultimately I go away from there with nothing more than just pictures of this car. The one detail that he knew, and this was just kind of hand-me-down information, was that this car was supposedly from New York. Now that is an extremely wide net to cast, especially when you're looking on the internet. So I had a little bit to go by and a whole lot of pictures, a lot of reference material on the actual chassis itself, and I just started studying. I looked through thousands, tens of thousands of pictures and galleries and old videos, just trying to find that exact match, because this car did have some really peculiar details. And we'll start at the front. This thing had a really nicely chromed front end, and the most peculiar part is that it had a 4-bar front suspension setup. So it had a torsion bar on the front, which was not uncommon for the 1960s, but the peculiar part were these long bars. It had 4 bars that go way back on the chassis, and that was peculiar. That gave me a reference point of something to look for when I'm looking through old pictures, because that doesn't look like your normal front suspension setup. And this was really nice stuff. This stuff had all been chrome plated. You can see the tubing is very small and delicate. This was a very lightweight car, And you can see that the wheelbase is not extremely long, so we're kind of thinking like mid-60s is when this would have been built. So all these things are going through my mind as far as key details to help identify this thing and maybe find an old picture of it. Moving further back, the roll cage design on this car is beautiful. This is one of the best you'll ever see. The main roll bar hoop is laid back nicely. You can see it's got a curved bar in the back. This thing had a very stylish profile, which was really uncommon on a home-built car. You would see this laid back bar on a Linwood chassis or maybe even on a Garlits chassis in the 60s. They had this nice laid back bar. But as I'm looking through all the details, I'm ruling out the Linwood or the Garlits or any of the other store-bought style chassis. This was truly a home build, and it had some really great details. So I go back home, I've got all my collection of pictures, and I just start hitting it hard on the Facebook groups and specifically looking for New York. And again, that's a wide net to try to cast on the entire internet. And one day it finally clicked. I had thumbed through tens of thousands of pictures trying to find the right profile and the right combination of pieces, and it finally clicked when I landed on the Tri-Cities Dragway Facebook group. So Tri-Cities Dragway, it was actually an airfield in Endicott, New York, and they used it for drag racing throughout the 60s. And when I landed on the Tri-Cities Dragway Facebook group, it's a pretty small group, just a few hundred members, and when I landed on that, the lead image, the header image for the group was this great shot that included the temporary timing tower, which was made out of a school bus with a wooden tower structure made on top of it. Super cool looking setup there. And in the foreground of that picture is a front engine dragster. And you can see the laid back roll bar. You can see the 4-bar front suspension. You can see the wheelbase. You can even see the tires and wheels on the back match perfectly to the tires and wheels that are on this car today. So this is the car. 100% in my mind, I have decided, I have figured it out, I've cracked the case, this is the car. So then I start digging, because this car has some really great looking details. You can see it's got a small block Chevy with a blower, it's got mechanical fuel injection up there, zoomy pipes. I mean, this is a quintessential slingshot dragster from the 60s. So this thing often ran as a double B gas dragster. So in the comments of this picture, I see the name Todd Luckner get mentioned, and so that sends me down another rabbit trail. So I type in Todd Luckner, and there he is. He is on Facebook. Easy. I reach out to him. I send him a message and start the conversation. I sent him some pictures of the car, and he wasn't so sure that that was his old dragster. So again, I wanted to be sure that my observations were right, and so I asked him if he had any old pictures of the car that he would mind sharing with me so that I could just continue my investigation, and he obliged. He mailed me some old pictures and slides from way back in the day, early 60s, and even some that were back in the 50s of some of his older drag racing days. So I scanned all those in and started really digging deep and investigating, and came to a pretty firm conclusion as I started looking at some of these pictures. So Todd was a pretty interesting guy. He was born in 1933, and he was from Corning, New York, where he started a garage there, Luckner's Garage, in 1955. And he was a full-on car guy. He was a gearhead, and he liked figuring out how to go fast. And his original drag car was a 34 Ford, and it had a Ford flathead V8. It had been channeled over the frame. Fenders are long gone, and he drag raced this car. He went 97 miles per hour with it at South Butler Dragway in New York, and then eventually he started building other drag cars. And he built his first dragster after building the 34 Ford, and it had several different engine, transmission, and supercharger combinations. It had a Ford flathead V8, it had a Buick V8, it had a supercharger on the Buick V8, and it had a 348 Chevy engine. So he had a lot of different experimentation done on this thing, and he figured out what worked and what didn't. So after he figured out all this stuff on his first dragster, he wanted to build a second car, a brand new chassis with some new suspension ideas, a little bit lighter, a little more aerodynamic, lower to the ground, a lot of the stuff that he had learned through the years. So he laid all this out and welded it up. It was right there in his shop, So as I'm zooming in and really getting close to the details on this chassis as it's laying in his shop floor, I see he's building the bell housing, and this car was direct drive, just had a clutch, no transmission or anything like that. And you can see he's got all that mocked up with that bar that runs across from one frame rail to the other, tying in with that diagonal bar. It's all right there. And the next detail, and perhaps one of the most identifiable details on the whole car, is the gussets on that back bar. So it has a single back bar that's curved and ties down into the bottom of the frame rail. But as that down bar ties together with the other frame rail, you can see that intersection. There's 4 gussets that are welded to strengthen that intersection. And in those gussets are a series of holes. And it was not uncommon to drill holes in gussets back in the day. That was very normal to take weight out of the car by drilling holes. But the way this thing is structured, we can look side by side and see that this is for sure the same car. We can see the way the diagonal bars are laid out. Everything is exactly the same. Other details you can see on the roll bar are those horizontal straps that go from that down bar around to some very small round tube uprights, and you can see that that is used for a headrest. He's got it padded and got sort of a naugahyde type material that's wrapped around those 2 steel straps. And we'll see in this little bit of video footage, this was actually the debut of the car at US 30 in York, Pennsylvania. He actually debuted this car with a 348 Chevrolet engine. It was actually the same engine out of his old dragster, and that was just to make sure that this thing was going to handle properly. He had big plans to put together a real serious engine combination after he got all the chassis details sorted out. Here's a picture of it when it still had the 348 in it, and check out that tow car. The old school Pontiac pulling this dragster, that is a cool combination. But back here you can see he's got some really skinny recap slicks on there on some steel wheels. And look at the bumper jack on the back. He actually used a bumper jack that went to a rear section of the frame where he could jack the back end up. You can also see the parachute mounted to that down bar, and actually Greg still has the parachute to this thing. He has the parachute, the steering wheel, the brake arm, as well as the master cylinder that was attached to it. He has the gas pedal, and it had like an expanded metal floor pan. It wasn't actually a sheet of metal, it was just a protective layer in case there was something huge come up through the bottom of the car. He's got all those pieces, including a rear end chunk for this thing. So in this picture, you can see he's now changed from the 348 engine over to a small block Chevy. It was a 331 cubic inch combination. You can obviously see here that it's got factory cast iron heads, and it has a Sirius blower and 2-port Hilburn fuel injection system on it. We've got the magnesium Halbrand wheels and Goodyear Blue Streak slicks. These are exact matches. The same wheels and even the same slicks from way back in the 1960s. So the thought that this thing got repurposed or ran as a bracket car or anything like that, all that's pretty much out the window because all of this stuff is unchanged. If this thing had gotten bracket raced, some of these things would have changed. They would have changed how the engine was mounted. They would have changed a lot of things because they would have moved that engine a little further forward and run a conventional transmission. They would have obviously changed the wheels and tires because in the 70s and 80s, tires were bigger. Everything was bigger. So you'd run a wider wheel, a wider tire, everything would have been different. The front of the car probably would have gotten stretched out longer had they run it in the 70s and 80s. Any way you look at it, this car appears to be 100% original to the way that it was when Todd Luckner was racing it with this blown small block Chevy combination. Now, one really odd detail on this car is the steering configuration. I've never seen another one like it. Now, on the side of the frame, you can see it's got double linkage, but what's really strange, and you can't see it on any of the completed pictures because the bodywork's in the way, is how the steering box is mounted. It's actually mounted over to the side, and instead of being center mounted with a shaft coming off the side, it's mounted way over here to the left side of the car, and it has sort of a bent pitman arm. It's a very odd looking setup, and I'm not sure exactly if that was original to the Todd Luckner configuration. He didn't seem to think that that was something he would have done, but obviously a lot of time had passed between the time he was racing this car and now. In my conversations with Todd, he was a little bit fuzzy on the dates as far as when this car was built, how long it raced, and he didn't have any exact numbers as far as what this car ran in the quarter mile. So after this car was built and finished and went on to a new owner, he ended up building an Austin Healey that was sort of a modified sports car, class car, but ended up running in the altered class. And then he also built an altered roadster and had a serious interest in drag racing for years. But this dragster was a very special piece to him, and he had no idea that this thing still existed and had no idea where it may have ended up. I'm not sure exactly what happened after Todd got rid of it, but I know that this thing ended up in East Tennessee. So a guy with the nickname Pudgy in East Tennessee ended up getting his hands on this car. And he had it for quite a while and eventually sold it to Greg Daugherty, who still has it to this day. Now, Greg's had it for 20 plus years. He's had it stowed away inside of his shop and sometimes outside of his shop if he runs out of room. And he has plans to put this thing back together someday. He's still looking for some of the parts and pieces to make it right. He wants to make it period correct with the correct tires, the correct engine combination, all the right stuff. So hopefully one of these days we'll see this thing run again, but I thought it was the coolest thing to open up that back shop door and see an old dragster sitting here. Got a lot of cool details on it, a lot of home-built, home-brewed details that you're not going to find on any other dragster. It's truly one of a kind. It was hand-built by Todd Luckner in Corning, New York, and it still lives on today. Even though this thing is a long ways from making another pass, it's still hanging together and it's still got a story to tell. I hope you enjoyed following along with this old dragster. Thank you for watching.